Good morning and welcome to 92nd Street Y and our Week of Genius. I'm Rabbi Peter Rubinstein. I'm the director of the Jewish community and the Bronfman Center here at the Y. And this is my friend.
Imam Talib, Abdur-Rashid, good friend of Rabbi Peter Rubinstein, and I'm the Imam of the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood, not too far from here in Manhattan.
You know, we've known each other, I think, for about 25 years, and the amazing thing about any good friendship is that we continue to learn. Just to set the context for those of you who are online, and to tell you that if you have any questions, just send them in. Our group, a group from the Y and a group from the mosque, had a meeting. Yes, it was yesterday, right?
Day before.
The day before, Monday. Time is flying. In which we attempted to bring our communities together to discuss an issue that is the issue that we'll begin with today, which is how can we, as religious communities or as individuals, encourage more empathy and connection between our communities and individuals. Talib, I think I'm going to let you start with that,
Okay.
and then I'll respond.
Actually, I think we could probably use ourselves as an example because you and I have been friends for about 25 years, I think. And over the course
And we're both still young.
Yes. And over the course of those years, as we have cultivated our friendship, we've come to work together, eat together, socialize together. And that actually, I think, is a pretty good formula for people broadly. One of the things that you and I discussed was how do we take our personal relationship and then transfer that to the groups that we serve. And that was how this dialogue came about. And that's probably, again, a very good lesson. A mutual friend of ours, Dr. James Forbes, once said years ago that people watch television and they look at news about Muslims, or they look at news about Jews, but then they don't have a human face in their everyday dealings to connect it with. So perhaps one of the things that would help this process is to encourage dialogue where people exchange their own personal narratives.
You know, I was thinking as you said that, and I just wanted to mention that if you have any questions along our conversation, just send them in and we will do our best to answer them. I think you're right in certain ways, which is that we can fight against policies of our government. We can fight against, what's happening. But what we can do best is model. And the modeling that we have as individuals, and the modeling that we've just started with our communities, and I think that's important that we just started. We've had a relationship for 25 years,
Yes.
but we never thought about how we have to infuse our society and our culture with that kind of relationship. And I would say not only did we celebrate, but we sometimes cried together, mourned together. Mm-hmm. We were together for, sadly, sad event in your family. We were together for 9/11, and I think that what we're realizing is we probably don't know each other's stories. I remember we had a very difficult conversation at the Partnership of Faith, which we're involved in, about historic memory.
Yes.
And how we bring so much of what we took from our parents and our grandparents to the present, never really synthesizing it into our own existence today.
And then to be able to exchange historic memories is really what's enlightening. Let me give you an example of that. I remember once during one of our dialogues, very similar, a Jewish woman who was in our group and who was actually, she was a little older than most people in the group. And she said that, she shared that years ago, in the days of radio, not even so much television, that when a news story would come on the air about a robbery or some kind of crime being committed, that she would say to herself, "Oh my God, I hope the person is not Jewish," she would say. And from the moment I heard her say that until right now, I really related to that, because there are different stories that come over the news. And the first thing I say to myself, "Oh my God, I hope the person is not Muslim," you know? And so again, just exchanging stories as individuals and as communities helps to create, and I think in the question they use the word empathy, and that's very important. You know, empathy is a result of people coming to know each other.
Yeah, I mentioned when our groups met that until you know the pain and the love in each other's heart, you really don't know them. You know, and what is happening certainly in the Jewish community today, well, there are two things that are happening. One is a matter of discovery. When I grew up, I didn't know a Muslim. You know, when they talked about Western religions, they didn't necessarily include Islam, and it was Christianity and Judaism. But what I realize today is that your community and my community are suffering a significant impact by virtue of hate speech and hate crimes. The number of anti-Semitic events, presently the calls to JCCs and Jewish institutions around the country threatening bombs and having therefore to evacuate those really raises our antenna. You know, we as Jews have very sharp antenna anyway because of past persecution. But so does the Muslim community.
Yes, and then when you live in a place like America and a city like New York, there are layers to that discussion that are constantly added. On one layer, yes, as Jews and as Muslims, but on the other, in the other layer, the Muslim community in America, of course, is a multi-ethnic community. And so the Muslims in America, some of them are Arabs, some of them are African Americans, some of them are Latinos. And so this really helps, I think, connect the reality of what it means to be an American with these ethnic and religious complexities. For instance, in another discussion that we were having, I mentioned that I was born in Greensboro, North Carolina, in the South. And when I was a little boy, specifically in the summer of 1959, my siblings and my mother and I moved to New York. And it's only been maybe 2 years ago, while doing reading of religious groups in America, that I discovered that in the year 1959, that 10 synagogues were bombed in the South, right in the South where I come from, in that same year of 1959. And then, of course, after that, black churches began being bombed. And so, yes, so as a Muslim who's an African American in the year 2017, when I hear about these threats of violence to houses of worship and things of that nature, automatically there's a recognition or a resonance or an empathy that wells up within me, not only as a Muslim, but perhaps even more so as an African American who's a Muslim.
Yeah. You know, I'm reflecting on the conversation we had on Monday when our groups got together. And I remember a member of your mosque saying that, you know, the idea of being other is not new for you as a Muslim, because they were black, right? And so that even before they became Muslim, they were already feeling like the other. Right? And it's something a member of our group, Jews, said, you know, we can actually, and this was actually said at the Partnership of Faith yesterday, we can get by, right? We can take off our yarmulke, right? We can walk the street. Nobody is going to look at us as other. But members of your community, both because of dress, maybe because of racial profiling, are that. And yet, we both have had histories that make us perhaps, I don't think hypersensitive, but certainly attuned to what the other is going through. I was at a demonstration on immigration, and which it is, we were all immigrants, we were all refugees, and so I feel a real kinship for those people who are in this country feeling outside, outside the boundaries.
Well, very, very much. Strangers in a strange land, as the scriptures say. And again, even more so, because as an African American, I'm not an immigrant, and nor were my ancestors immigrants. So again, you get these nuanced complexities of what it means to live in this day and time. And for instance, again, one of the things that people ask, and I think we've actually had a question come in, how can we get more people from different religions together in conversations like these? And there are probably several answers to that question. The group that you and I are amongst the founders of, a Partnership of Faith in New York City, we first came together in order to address our common human concerns. If you recall, this was a couple of decades ago.
It was actually, I remember, it was right after the Crown Heights riots and the shootings.
Right.
Right, within
there were a lot of shootings in New York City that year, and as religious leaders, we decided, well, let's get together. First we got together and we were talking about these things ourselves, and then we decided to begin to encourage conversations amongst us and amongst members of our congregations. And so this is something, there's certainly enough concern on a human level now about the many problems, many things going on in our society. And if congregants and their leaders would be brave enough to reach out to other congregants and other leaders of other faiths, just in order to discuss, human concerns, then perhaps this could be a start of building relationships. This is about relationships.
Yeah.
You and I are both leaders, but we have a relationship,
Right.
and that's what's important.
Yeah, I was thinking that the irony is that there's an unintended consequence that has come about from some of what's happened as a result of our, this present administration, which is there's been a kind of a launching forward of these conversations in ways that hadn't happened before. That I think there is a new awareness of there's a community in our midst, whether that community is either Jews that I don't know, or Christians I don't know, or Muslims that I don't know. There are communities in our midst that we really haven't talked to across boundaries, across geographical boundaries, across religious boundaries, across political boundaries, and there's so much to it. And the other part of it that I find ironic is that in some way, and I'm not going to speak for you, I'll speak for me, but in some ways it's easier to speak to people like you or in the Christian community who occupy the place in the community that I occupy in the Jewish community, rather than, that's an easier conversation than it is for me to have a conversation with the fundamentalists in my community. Which, rarely it's ironic that they don't take place as easily as I can have the conversation with people of a more liberal ilk in other religious communities.
I've heard that same comment in about maybe 6 months ago. I was in a meeting of imams from different parts of the country, and that same exact comment was made. So, but someone said in that meeting, and I'll repeat it here, that the kind of mainstream practitioners of the various faiths are actually the ones that are in the majority. And if we would just reach out to each other, and again, I'll say this, it really takes courage. And because if we feel that way, living in a city like New York, then what about people in other parts of the country? What about so-called Middle America? What about people on the West Coast? Someone once said to me, you know, you people in New York City, interfaith or multi-faith gatherings are kind of common for you all. It's no longer unusual, say, at a public event to see a rabbi, an imam, a priest, and a pastor standing together making some kind of joint statement, but still very much in other parts of the country, this person said to me, looking at, envisioning that type of picture is like watching an episode of, I'm going to date myself here, an episode of The Twilight Zone, they said to me, because it's still not very common.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's another irony in all this is that when it comes to the public portrayal of our religious groups, we're not usually the ones who are portrayed. Certainly in looks, as a Jew, you know, if you look at the front pages of when they do stories on Passover or on the high holidays, it's not somebody like me. It's somebody
You mean
with
not as good looking as you?
no, not as young as I am. No, but you know, it's usually a person with a beard wearing a kippah, and it's not the liberal wing of our community. So that kind of the public portrayal of what does a Jew look like and what is a Jew. And in some ways, that's also impacted by the policies of the state of Israel right now, which confuse things or make things a little bit even more challenging. But we're not the ones that would necessarily be represented. The people being represented are those that are causing harm to other communities, that are much more fundamental in their beliefs, that want to stay within their boundaries, ghettos or otherwise.
Yeah, and I'll say that I don't know if it's as much the fundamental adherence as it is an extreme adherence. But you're right; those are the people who are projected. I automatically think of two things when you say that. One is, again, the face of Muslims in America, particularly post 9/11. Something that we who are Muslim African Americans are very sensitive about is that post 9/11, there's been an almost complete erasure of the African American Muslim face that appears on talk programs, that appears in stories. Yet, African American Muslims are, by every study that's ever been done, a third of the Muslim population in America is an African American population. African Americans, percentage-wise, are amongst non-immigrant people in America. African Americans are a higher percentage of Muslims than other Muslim ethnic groups. Yet and still, and we're now referring to this as a kind of invisible man syndrome. Mm-hmm. And this just makes it difficult for everyone because, again, if the Jewish community is viewed as being a monolithic community, which it is not, right, or the Muslim community is being viewed as a monolithic community, which it is not, then that means that people are still regarding each other through the lens of stereotypes, right, as opposed to a reality.
And therein, I'm thinking about an answer to the question that was asked is what can be done. the issue, the question I think we have to ask ourselves and each other is, what are our fears and what are our aspirations? In other words, if I were to scale the level of fear within the Jewish community now, it is significantly higher than it was a year ago or 2 years ago. You know, we had come through the Holocaust, we had come through, you know, other terrible events, and there was, you know, we were coming into what we thought was a period of normalcy or normalization. More recently, I'd say, and I don't want to place blame anywhere, but there's been a cultural shift where the other, and both of us are in that group, where the other is considered, you know, the other is frightened, right? I think that it's the first time I've heard about, you know, the talk about Hitler and Nazism and return to, you know, this populism that, you know, is going to be destructive to some would say the fabric of our society, but certainly, you know, raising the fear of the Jewish community. So can you give us a sense of what the fears are within your community and the hopes and aspirations?
Yeah, I think so, because I'm going to speak now generally. Muslims in America, I would say, are sharing that same anxiety and fear, and many of them, you know, those who are immigrants, those who are, let us say, of Southern Asian background, those of Arab background, are expressing this same sort of fear for their physical safety, fear of deportation, fear of bias attacks, and that sort of thing. And, you know, facts are facts, and by facts, I'm speaking now of actual facts as opposed to alt facts. Mm-hmm. The actual facts are that since the election of President Trump, that hate crimes against Muslims and hate crimes against Jews have increased astronomically throughout the country, including right here in a diverse city like New York. So that can't be a coincidence. It can't be a coincidence. The American landscape is now, in a very ugly way, beginning to reflect the European landscape of the past few years, when there's a rise in these Nazi-like hate groups. The atmosphere is in Europe over the past few years is being permeated by anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic attacks, being permeated by very intense anti-immigrant feeling. And so, to be very honest with you, Peter, when I heard the rhetoric of presidential candidate Donald Trump, it reminded me of the recent rhetoric in Europe. And that was even before Brexit and all of that. So we're really moving into very challenging, and some people might say very perilous territory now in the history of the what I'll refer to as the American democratic experiment.
Yeah, and it's all the more reason why you know, there has to be cross-boundary conversation.
Absolutely.
Right, and that sometimes, as you pointed out, in New York, it's probably a little bit more accessible than it may be in other parts of the country. But it seems to me that there are, you know, diverse religious groups in every location. That may be an overstatement. I haven't examined every location, but I think that you can find people who are outside, who perceive themselves as outside the mainstream, religiously and otherwise, in every location. I know within the Jewish community, the level of fear, especially because of these phone calls, which, although they may not have substance behind them, if you have a child in a nursery school, our head tells us we should not necessarily evacuate. There's been no proof that any of these have been realistic episodes. But if we have children in a nursery school, or we're in charge of those nursery schools, we have to be able to feel safe and take them out. And what John Miller, who is the head, the commissioner in charge of intelligence and counterterrorism in New York, said that in some ways that kind of feeds the sense of power of those who want to hurt us, and so it's not necessarily a good tactic to immediately evacuate. But that sense of that there are those who would not mind if we were hurt, not they were hurt, would not mind if we were hurt. That would not mind in the same way that happened in Germany if something something terrible happened. That may not be a reality, but the fact is we're sensitive to that now. There's a question that how can we best amplify voices of people from different faiths? Well, this is one way. This is one way.
Use social media.
Use social
That's
media.
how you do it. Don't rely upon the mainstream media. Use social media. Bring groups of people together who are like you, but unique in their own way, who have the same inclinations. Bring them together. Form groups. Take pictures. Take video, and start flooding social media with those kind of images and those kind of conversations, and that will amplify your voices.
Yeah. Around January 1st, the Y Partnership of Faith that we're members of,
Yes.
and the Wexner Foundation put together this Together Toward a Year of Light, in which we took photos. We asked clergy across the country to just get together and hold candles. We didn't want to make this a political statement. This was really a statement of aspiration. Now, clergy don't always take directions very well, right? So it didn't work the way we would have liked it to have worked. But I think that you're right, and we're going to do more, and hopefully more of these conversations on Facebook Live. I would say that we may expand it to include somebody who could represent the Christian community as well. We certainly have friends that are part of our group.
And on International Women's Day, we need to say that the talking heads shouldn't always be male heads. They should be female heads also.
And we have those people
Yes, we do.
part of our community, and we actually talk to each other.
Good.
So we'll do that.
Aren't you glad we got that in before we
I
have
am
to go
so
home?
glad. You know what? You and I together have a full brain. You have most of it. I have part of it. I think we're coming up on our time, and it's time to wrap up. Do you have a final thought?
Just once again, neither the Muslim nor Jewish communities are monolithic communities.
Yeah.
And if we start looking at each other through a prism of being neighbors and being fellow Americans and talking with each other instead of to each other, we'll all be better off.
Yeah, I think that what we can do is begin conversations with somebody that we certainly have not sat and had a meal with, but probably never asked their story. And if we can do that, then we'll walk together toward a year of light.
Outstanding.
So thank you all for joining us.
Here's our closing
Right.
image.
That's right. It's nice to have you as a friend.
Likewise.